Now, after understanding all the major concepts of React.js, at least the 50% major concepts of React.js, which are state, props, and lifecycle methods, we'll make a small application or like a clock kind of application implementing this, and how you can think in using all of these lifecycle methods and the state changes, right? So we'll implement a clock which displays basically the time, right? So let me do that. So we'll have two components over here again. One is the render component. One is the main component. And the second component is the clock component. Or you can simply name it as clock, and it extends react.component. Okay. So technically, what you're trying to do is you're trying to mock a clock. So every 1 second, your state should update so that it is displaying the time, right? So what is needed for it, right? So you need a constructor which takes the props and call the super props. And here in the state, you will store the current date, okay, which is new JavaScript date. Now we need to implement some mechanism. With which the state gets updated every 1 second and your component re-renders, right? So that is what we are trying to do here. I'll put the React fragment, and over here I'll display the clock. Okay, so I'll simply pass down, I'll store it in the form of UTC string. Okay, and I'll simply pass down the time equal to this dot state dot date. Okay, and here I will render it, this dot props dot time. Okay, so if I now look into my web page, it is displaying the time, which is perfectly all right. But I want to imitate the clock, right? So it means the seconds hand needs to be changed, and based on every render, whenever the time changes, it should render, right? So how do I implement that? Okay, so you can simply use one of your lifecycle method, and you can set a timer function which updates your component every 1 second. So basically, you need to change your state for every 1 second so that the component will automatically understand, okay, there is a state change, and detecting that state change, I can simply update my UI, right? So for that, one option is setting up a JavaScript interval. Okay, and how can you do that? So you will define a function tick. Okay, so this tick function basically calls the set state, right? Set state function, and what it does, it simply updates to the new date, okay, to UTC string. Now the trick is, you guys need to call this function every second, so that every second if this function is called, then that function will take care of updating the state, and that due to that update, the component will re-render, and the props passed to this component will get changed, and the clock will update. So it looks like we are looking at a normal clock, right? So where do you initiate the interval, right? So my first option is you can do it over here. That is this dot interval equal to, I'm using the JavaScript core function set interval. So I can call tick this dot tick over here, and what frequency I have to call this? 1 second, right? So now what am I defining? I'm creating an interval function which calls the this.tick for every 1 second, and tick function will update the UI because it is updating the set state. It is calling the set state. But yeah, so I think we got the thing what we wanted, right? But if you look at the console, so see there is a warning. So it is actually doing what we wanted or what we are exactly expecting. So, but there is a warning. Can't call set state on a component that is not yet mounted. Okay, so it is not a good practice to add the set state, I mean call the tick function in the constructor or setting up the interval. What is the best case is that you can call this in the component did mount. So in the component did mount, you set the interval, and as you remember, you can clear the interval in the component will unmount. So now what am I trying to do is that first thing I have date and interval in my state. Okay, so I'm in the component did mount, I'm setting another state, that is component this dot set state, and interval is equal to interval interval and colon set interval, right? So whatever the set interval value I got, I am storing it in the state again, right? And in the component will unmount phase, what I'll do is I'll simply clear that interval, clear interval, and where do I get the value from? This dot state dot interval, and after that my work is done. So I am creating an interval timer, which it is a reference to the interval function, and in the component will unmount phase I am clearing that interval. So just a quick recall what exactly we are trying to do here. So we have constructor where we define the state, and we have component did mount lifecycle where we are actually creating or calling the set interval function. So set interval function internally calls this dot tick. So this tick function is called every 1 second because we mentioned it as 1 second, and the tick function will update the date which is stored in the form of state. And since the state is getting updated every second, it will render the component, and we are passing the state or I mean time as prop to the clock component. So the clock component will update every second, right? And technically you don't have to define clock as a class component because we don't have any state associated with it. So you can simply define it as a function component. So return and how do you access props in the functional component? Props dot time. That's it. So now if you see, it is perfectly all right. No warning messages, nothing. Your clock is getting updated. Right? I will put it inside the h1 tag so it looks a bit bigger. Yes. So see, now we have implemented the clock in a very simple fashion using the component did mount or the lifecycle methods and the state functionality and the state of the ReactJS. So it's a very simple logic. You need to update your state every second. It means you need to call the set state function every second. For that, we have used the inbuilt JavaScript set interval function. So that function will register a callback, and that callback will be called every 1 second, which is updating the set state. And whenever the data gets changed, the UI will be updated. And if you see in the console, if you see here over here, what is being painted. So none of the elements are getting changed, only the element which are changing. So if you want to understand this particular part as well, UTC time. Okay, UTC time. So if you see here, only that data is getting changed which is actually getting changed. So this particular string is getting changed, right? UTC time is going to remain same. So that component is not getting modified, or that string is not getting modified. Only this string is modified. That is how intelligent the ReactJS is. It determines the changes and updates only that part of the component. Okay, cool.